Tonight's notes are about the next major battle following Washington's defeat in New York City. So up to this point, we have learned how the Americans held their own up in Massachusetts, right? That they had inflicted a lot of damage to the British at Bunker Hill, even though they lost the battle. How they got the cannons from Fort Ticonderoga and forced the British to abandon Boston. We also learned how the British came back at New York City and forced the Americans in fight after fight after fight to retreat, to keep retreating. And finally, they forced the Americans all the way out of New York City and across New Jersey into Pennsylvania. So they had forced the Americans way, way, way back. And the British had taken control of New York City. So that brings us to the winter of 1776 and the Battle of Trenton. So as we have learned, Washington and the American Army, the Continental Army, retreated out of New York all the way across New Jersey and into Pennsylvania. And really, the best thing Washington did during this time was avoid getting caught, to avoid getting trapped and captured. But as you can imagine, if the best thing that's going for you is that you're just not getting caught, your morale, your confidence, your belief in yourself is probably going to be pretty low. The Army only had about 2,000 soldiers in fighting shape. At the start of the fight for New York, the Army was about 10 times that size. So in a matter of only a few months, the Army has been literally decimated. It's been cut into 1/10 of what it used to be. The Army was running out of supplies. Blankets, food, warm clothing, guns, bullets, cannons, tents. All of these are running low. And it's wintertime. So the Continental Army is just, their morale is just super low, down in the dumps. They don't feel good about what's happening. And there's not a lot of hope, right? I think a lot of them probably felt like it was only a matter of time before this revolution was over. Washington knew his army needed a victory, right? They needed some sort of boost to their confidence. So he hatches a pretty smart plan to attack the Hessians, who were those German mercenaries, right? They were German soldiers who had been hired by the British to fight for the British. The Hessians had been chasing Washington's army. And the Hessians were camped in a city called Trenton. Now, Washington's army is on one side of the Delaware River in Pennsylvania. The Hessians are on the other side of the Delaware River in New Jersey, in Trenton. And Washington comes up with a plan to attack them. On Christmas night of 1776, Washington and his men got into the boats, they crossed the freezing Delaware River, and went back into New Jersey. This was the very first time that Washington's army had gone on the attack. Up to this point, they had pretty much just been defending and retreating. You can see the famous picture that goes with this battle is, of course, what you see on the screen here. Washington crossing the Delaware. It's a very elaborate, incorrect, but elaborate painting showing, Washington bravely standing up and crossing the ice-filled river. Of course, Washington would not have been standing. It would have been very silly. He probably would have gotten knocked out of the boat. But it shows that brave, dramatic scene, right, crossing the river to attack the Hessians. The next day, the day after Christmas, they show up early in the morning in Trenton and surprise the Hessians. They took the town, they took nearly 1,000 prisoners, and most importantly, they got tons of supplies and weapons that they very much needed. And this was really the first big victory for the Continental Army. This was an incredibly important victory. Not because it, ended the war, because it didn't. But it gave the colonists the supplies and the ammunition that they very much needed. It gave them a huge boost in terms of confidence and morale. It encouraged soldiers to re-enlist, right? A lot of soldiers were almost done, right? They were going to be free to go back home. But this encouraged them to stick it out, to re-enlist in the army. And it showed that the colonists could hold their own in an open field fight with the British or against the Hessians, right? So I gave them that confidence boost as well. Still, it's not like the Battle of Trenton massively changed the course of the war. It was an important victory for the Americans, but it didn't change the fact that Britain was still the heavy favorite, because Britain still controlled New York City. Britain still had a bigger, better trained army. And not that long after, right, when in the spring of 1777 comes and the war starts up again, the British captured Philadelphia, right, the colonial capital, and Congress was forced to flee, right? So Trenton was important, right? But at this point, going into 1777, Britain is still the favorite. So for your response question, what I want you to do is draw and label a picture, as we've done with the previous sets of notes, that shows an important detail about what happened at the Battle of Trenton. Okay? If you don't have a paper copy, you'll need to print out the notes and draw your picture in. Be sure to label it as well. Explain what's happening in your drawing.